Hello and welcome to Unit 2, Methods of Research. The second part, we're going to look at approaches to sociological research. So this is the second part of the unit, and in the next video, we're going to look at research issues. So within this video, we're going to look at use of approaches on research methods, the mixed method approach, the positivist and interpretivist approach, and debate of science and sociology. So we're going to start looking at not really research methods like we did last video, but techniques. So these are like categories of the research methods we have looked. So firstly, case studies. This would include, this is basically when a researcher studies a really small group. So it can include stuff like group interviews or even like observation, like when the researchers join groups. Um, so the strength of these, because I'm gonna be talking about like the strengths and limitations of each, which are quite universal. And here's just a tip: like if you know these general ones, like they can obviously ask for like case studies, and the rest that we'll look at, like these approaches for their strengths and limitations. But also if you get asked a research method that you know is a case study, or the rest we're gonna look at, like part of that category of approaches, those strengths and limitations you can also apply them. So it's really good to know them. Well, you still have to know them because they can ask particularly about them, but you can apply them to the research methods of each category. That makes sense. So the strengths are that data has a lot of depth and detail because researchers obviously focus on one single group, and because it has depth and detail, it is more valid, obviously. And also, large amounts of data can be collected in a cost-effective way. Like the researcher doesn't have to spend too much money, like they're just studying one single group, but because they study like in so much depth, they get a large amount of data, like a lot of data. So that's really cost effective. However, the limitations are that they demand a lot of skill from the researchers because of these detailed nature. Like they have to get so much information that it does take a lot of skill, and because of that same information, it does take a lot of time as well, like up to months or years sometimes. And because it's like a small group, it's difficult to generalize, so it's not representative usually. So the next one is social surveys, and this would include things like questionnaires and structured and semi-structured interviews. So it wouldn't include unstructured interviews because those don't have like pre-coded questions. So the strengths are that they do tend to be representative of groups, because like researchers will send them out to a lot of people, and they usually do look for representativity because they want to generalize results. So that's a strength. Like the researchers can generalize the results, and particularly like cross-sectional surveys, they can explain differences in behaviors by changing variables. So cross-sectional surveys are when a researcher identifies a group with like similarities, like broad similarities, sorry, such as like level of education, and then they measure differences with a single variable, such as like do people with higher educations have higher marriage rates? So those are particularly useful to explain difference in behavior. And then limitations are that they have a low response rate. Researchers don't know who has answered, unless it's in person, like structured and semi-structured interview. Like that would be particularly for questionnaires. And it's also like a really cold method for sensitive topics, which might be better to use an unstructured interview, like a conversation, where the researcher can build trust with the respondent. Then we have ethnography, and this is basically like a really in-depth study of a group or culture. But like differently to case studies, it's when the researcher does go in the daily life of participants, and like it involves a lot of things. Like obviously it involves observation. In a way, it's quite similar to case studies, but like it just involves a lot more. Like researchers can use like a variety of methods. Like they will look at documents, photograph, diaries. They might use unstructured interviews. So like they really get in the life of the people they're studying. So the strengths are that it's quite extensive, it's very in depth and detailed data. Again, that means that the like findings are high in validity. First to hand is achieved, and that's a concept we looked in the previous video where like researchers understand by experiencing, and it's a concept I think introduced by Weber. You would have to reference him if you talk about that. And rapport is also achieved, which is like trust with the respondents, like because they allow you in their lives and you kind of build trust with them. They're more likely to open up, and when you ask questions, they're more likely to answer honestly. That actually both of those actually increase validity. The limitations are that it's time consuming for researchers. Obviously, they have to get in the life of these people, of this culture, or usually it's like from different cultures, but not necessarily. Also because the researcher has to like observe them. That's what's involved in observation, but also like when they look at their documents, photographs, and diaries, they have to take subjective interpretations. and even just like observing their day-to-day life, it might lead to observer bias. Like they might be biased and make subjective conclusions, which might actually lower the validity and reliability. Yeah, moving to reliability, actually, it's really hard to replicate, to find the same group and similar researchers to replicate. Like it's just really hard because groups are so particular, so it's not really reliable. And lastly, again, like case studies, because it focuses on one group, it's not representative and you can't generalize the results. And then moving to longitudinal studies, the strength of these, well, first of all, these is a study that takes place over a long period of time. And the researcher might use questionnaires, for example, like every month they might send questionnaires to this group of people, or non-participant observation, whether like they observe their lives but they don't participate in that. Basically, it's just any research method can be used, but it's just like like the research itself takes a long period of time, like years, because they want to track changes with time. So yeah, the strengths are obviously that researchers can track personal and social changes over long periods of time and find trends. Trends that usually remain hidden if you like just study, like for example, in a case study a group for like even a few months, like that you can't find exactly like trends as you would if you study them for like years. And they usually are based on representative samples, um, because researchers obviously dedicate so much time. They do want to have a representative group, and they can be really used to suggest correlations and causations. Again, kind of similar to like how they can uncover trends. And then limitations are that there can be sample attrition, which is like when a number of people drop out, and that actually reduces the representativeness of the sample. So like the type of people who remain are a certain type of people. So the study only, like the results only applies to those category of people, and the people who dropped out, just like reduces their representativeness, of course. Like it's kind of like the sample selects itself. And sample attrition might happen. That's actually a risk that increases with time, but it might happen because people lose interest, or they move away without the contact details, or sometimes they might just die. So yeah, that always increases with time. And then the other limitation is that so it does like researchers can identify trends, but they don't really explain them. So they can be criticized for lacking depth and detail. So the main exact question you would have for the use of approaches would be kind of similar to the one we looked for research methods before. It would be explain one strength and one limitation, or two strengths or two limitations of, and then the research approach. And then you would do the same thing, like point, you name one, explain why it has such a strength or limitation, and then explain why it's a strength or limitation. So we're going to look at mixed methods, and there's two key words, and they look really similar, but they actually are different. So on one hand, we have methodological pluralism. It's quite tricky to pronounce, and that's the theoretical argument for combining research methods. So the like reason why it's a good thing to combine a research method is because they complement each other, and you can use one like to like kind of offset the weaknesses of one method. Like we'll look at that later. For example, like you might use a quantitative method and a qualitative method so that you get both valid and reliable data in the research. And then triangulation is the actual practice of using more than one method in sociological research. Um, but yeah, for example, you might use questionnaires and unstructured interviews. So the questionnaires are very reliable because they can be repeated, so they give reliable data. But sometimes they're criticized because it's not exactly that valid data. But in an unstructured interview, researchers can respond freely and as at the length they want, and they open up because there's rapport, like confidence and trust built. So data is a lot more valid. So, but it's not that reliable because you can't really repeat an unstructured interview and compare answers. So if you use both of them in the research, that like makes the research much better. So that's an example of how like it would be beneficial to like why the theoretical argument for combining the research is because they complement each other. And then yeah, so triangulation strengths, like there's multiple strengths. And also there's different ways of triangulation. Like some people just think, like some students just think that it's using more than one type of method, but it also can be different researchers using the same method. And if that, like the strength of that would be that if they arrive to the same results, they can confirm the reliability of data. And another thing that can be done is like using researchers from different ethnic groups, age groups, gender, and class to avoid observer and interview bias. So if they use different researchers and plus they're like from different social groups, that not only confirms reliability, but it can also avoid observer and interview bias. So that's two different strengths, kind of. And this is particularly true when the method involves interpretations, like the second part, like using researchers from different social groups. If the method is kind of like involves interpretations, example, because I already said unstructured interview before, let's go back to that example. There's really long responses, and it's not just like pre-coded, like there's a certain amount of responses, like certain possibility of responses, like respondents can answer freely, so then like interviewer has to like analyze that and come to conclusions. So that that's a method that involves interpretation. So for those methods that do involve interpretation, it's really useful to avoid bias use researchers in different groups. The limitations are, however, that it does add another layer of time, effort, and expense. That's because, like, first of all, there needs to be more time to analyze data, and sometimes it may not be easy to compare a data. If they're like, for example, one method is quantitative and the other one is qualitative, it might be hard to like compare, and sometimes data might contradict each other. So if like two different methods show different results and reach different like opposing conclusions, it might be really hard for the researcher to then choose which one to believe or which one to choose to show in the research. Or they might have to repeat the investigation altogether again. They also more money because they need to employ more researchers. Actually, that's also more time because they actually, like, whoever's leading the research has to find those researchers. And it's just harder to coordinate because the research is larger. So the exam questions you would have for this is explain two reasons. Well, this is obviously one of like the main choice that you would get, but obviously it could be anything, but this is one that does come out quite a lot, at least when I was doing the exams. And it's explain two reasons why sociologists may use either triangulation or methodological pluralism. And it's an 8 marker, so you would make a point, then you explain, then you give evidence and example, and then you kind of like the last sentence would be like an analysis or link to the question again. So what I would do is, for example, like the example part, just use like a research method and show the strengths and limitations, how they would complement, like the example I gave before. Um, Maybe you could have like one paragraph, because you would do this twice, right, to get like 4 marks, and 4 marks. So you'd have like a paragraph combining like the strengths and limitations, like how that works with like how good it's to combine quantitative and qualitative data, which is the one I said, and then maybe you'd have another paragraph of like how good it is to use different researchers. But obviously you have to point, explain, evidence, examples, the most important part, and then like analyze that. So then positivism is it's like an interpretation like a approach as well to sociology, but not like well yeah, it's actually related also to research methods, but it's like an entire different thing to what we were looking at before. Like it's not a category of research method, it's like a belief of how sociology should be studied. And there's positivism and then there's interpretivism, and they're opposite. So positivists believe that sociology should be studied like science, and sociology should use a scientific method. So that would involve like systematic observation, accurate testing, quantitative measurements. They prefer to study society in a macro level. That means like because they believe institutions and social structures affect individuals, right? They want to study how that happens. So they look at macro level, like not at, they don't study individuals, but rather these social institutions. Like that includes like stuff like education, family, religion, the media. So those things that we're going to look more in further units. So they value objectivity, value freedom, and reliability. So they prefer quantitative methods. Again, all of those things are like in the sciences, and their primary goal is to explain the general rules of behavior, but not describe them. So like they just want to identify this causes this. It's like science. Like they want like in science there's nature laws, if that makes sense, like things that will happen because they happen, but they don't want to like explain them. They just want to like kind of identify them more or like explain what they are, but not like why they're that way. So looking closely to science, just to understand positivism a bit more, science is both valid and reliable. It has a set of procedures like the hypothetico-deductive method. And that's where like a hypothesis or research question is set, and then there's like data collection and then the conclusion based on tested facts. That's the important part, like they're tested. And then there's scientific ethos, which is like science has to be evaluated with universal criteria. It has to be like communal, so like it has to be published for everyone. Disinterest and skeptical, like nothing is beyond criticism, and that's the main part. Like when a research is published, it's it's true until it's disproven. That's the thing about science. Like it's always open to being disproved. And that's what the positivists want to kind of follow, because they believe that sociology should and can be studied like sciences. However, interpretivists believe that sociology can't be like science because people do have free will over their choices. We're not like programmed in a way, like we're not like this kind of links back to the nature versus nurture debate, but like they believe that we don't act how we act because of nature. Like we like do like have a choice over how we act, and humans are unpredictable, so they can't be studied like the natural world. So they study society in a micro level. That means like studying individuals and how they make sense of the world and create meanings. That's the main like thing they would focus is meanings, because they believe that individuals give meanings to things and look at things. Like they want to look things in the context of individuals to understand that and what shapes their choices and their behavior. So they believe that sociologists should acknowledge their values and allow a degree of subjectivity. So whilst they don't want to be entirely like not objective, they believe that it's better to like acknowledge your values in the research and then let others people judge whether you were good at keeping them out of the research. But they do believe that sociologists should accept them and be open about them in their research. They favor validity, so they prefer qualitative methods. And the primary goal is to describe and understand people's behavior. So they really value participation because of first to hand, like understanding by experiencing. Because again, according to them, individuals create society, and they believe that behavior rules are context bound. So they just really want to get into like people's life and understand their perspective and how they act, why they act, to like uncover like sociology. So the exam questions, and these are basically the same. The exam questions for the use of approaches would be: to what extent should sociologists value interpretivist methods over positive methods, or you would have it the other way around? Or to what extent should sociologists use scientific methods in sociology? So again, like the second question, scientific methods would basically mean positivism in sociology. And then I'm not going to go now into how you would answer these. I'll probably do this in a later video over exam technique. Um, but basically, these are both essay questions, and you would have to bring in like examples, like sociologists. You would have to have a balanced answer, so like in favor and against, etc. And finally, some key sociologists. So you have Denzin, which he argues that triangulation allows researchers to offset the weakness of one method with the strength of another. That's basically what we said before, but he's the one who said it, so you would have to reference him. Merton argues that a scientific ethics is required to make sure that scientists all follow the same procedures. Like, well, he basically just argued scientific ethics is required. I just added this part because it's what it says like in the course book. But yeah, just he actually just said the first part. And then Comte argues, well, he's actually the one who established positivist approach in sociology, arguing that sociology is a science and can discover laws of human behavior like scientists can uncover laws of natural world and nature. And that's the end of this lesson. I hope you found it useful, and please like and subscribe to the channel if you found it useful, and share if you know any classmates who might also like the video. Thank you for watching.